Hi Gordon. This afternoon we're going to look at the vacuum system on a Mercedes 300D or 300D Turbo or a 240D. They all operate the same way, and actually some more of the 123s use a similar system at least. And that is the pneumatic system that's used to operate the door locks. It's a very frequent problem. There's a diaphragm that opens each one of the doors, or that operates the lock on each one of the doors, and the diaphragm is operated by just a little pneumatic vacuum operated system, and frequently the little rubber diaphragms get holes in them, and that's why it won't operate. So if we look kind of at a picture of the whole thing, I've drawn a little diagram here on the wall. It gives a brief overview of the entire thing. At the front of the engine there's a vacuum pump. A diesel engine does not have a Venturi effect in the manifold, so you have to have a pump that actually it pumps vacuum. It sucks air. It's mechanically driven. It's at the front of the engine. We'll go look at where it is. And then we're going to use that pump, and actually through a system of just small lines, we're going to pump down from this point. There's a line that goes to a reservoir to operate these door lock systems. In other words, the system has to operate when the engine is off. So we've got to have a source of vacuum, and the way we do that is through a check valve. We pump down a little reservoir. The reservoir is actually behind the back seat in the car. We'll show you where that is. That reservoir very, very rarely leaks or breaks. Really nothing happens to it. And essentially it's just an evacuated tank. In other words, it has suction, or is capable of providing some suction to these valves that operate up and down, these little pneumatic valves that have rubber diaphragms. So anyway, when the car is running, we're going to pump this tank down, and then we're going to use this evacuated tank as a source of vacuum for the door locks. Now, on the driver's door, and Mercedes was very smart about this, the only way to lock the system in this car is to lock it from the driver's door with the key on the outside of the car, or at least the door has to be shut. This is a mechanical switch right here, and all it does is switch the vacuum, and the vacuum comes from this tank. So we've got a T-valve right here, and this tank is supplying vacuum to the T-valve. And as the key is turned one way or another, it just applies vacuum to either side of the T. If vacuum is applied to one side of the T, it pulls all the locks on the three doors that are left, plus there's a lock for the gas tank flap, and there's a lock for the trunk. It pulls all of those locks down, or the opposite way, unlocking, it allows the vacuum to be applied to the other side of the little vacuum switch, the little diaphragm switch, and they operate in the other way. It's more easily understood if we go over and we've got one of those little vacuum elements, and we can show you exactly how they operate. So let's go. Okay, the only thing we really need a special tool that we need to chase down these vacuum leaks is a little pump. I bought this one at Sears. It's a Sears vacuum pump. You can see that it's just a little hand-operated pump, and it has a gauge on it. And the gauge is critical, because what it does is it shows when I have a leak. And these leaks could be very hard to find. They can be very slow. So you've got to have this function, this tool function. Don't have to get it at Sears. I think I paid many years ago about $40 or $45 for this. You can find them for $50, $60 in any number of places, perhaps even cheaper than that. I haven't tried.
Can you cap the end and pump it and show us how these?
So if I hold the end, you can see that when it's not leaking, and maybe I can't hold a perfect vacuum on. Yeah, I can. It was leaking a little bit. And if I let it leak, you can see that it goes down. And it's got a little release on it here, so if I want to release the vacuum, I can. So it's got a little thumb release on it, a little valve. So, in order to illustrate how this thing works, let's look. This is an old door switch. And I said that the vacuum will be applied from the vacuum reservoir, and it's going to go to the middle. When we turn the key is hooked through a little tab, a little piece of metal to this, and it pushes back and forth, and it applies the vacuum source, which is in the middle, to either this line or this line alternately. And you can see that the vacuum reservoir, the thing that's got constant vacuum after I shut the air off through that check valve arrangement, is here. So we're going to simulate the whole door system by putting our vacuum pump here, and then we have an element. This is an actual door element. And first, I should show how it works perhaps. If I hook up vacuum to one side of this door element, well, I would get the wrong side. If I hook it up to one side, it'll move mechanically this thing. See, it pulls it down. So there's a little rubber diaphragm in the middle of this, and if I pull on one side, there's actually a chamber, and I'm evacuating that chamber and forcing with the rubber diaphragm this thing down, and this thing is connected to the locking arrangement through a bar. So if I take that off and hook it up to the other side, it'll pull it in the opposite direction, which would be the equivalent of locking or unlocking. Okay, so I'm going to hook the vacuum pump to the center and hook each of these lines to either side. Now, if I operate the pump, you can see that nothing moved, but if I move the switch, similar to what would happen if I turned the key, you can see it started to move. I don't have a good source of vacuum. I need a tank of evacuated air, but if I would have had it, it would have gone down to that position. And now if I do moving the key again, it started to come up, but what I need to do is pump it. Okay, I only need to pump it because I don't have a reservoir, but you see the effect. So that's what happens when we move the key back and forth. All the vacuum elements are hooked together through a series of splitters. Okay, so you put vacuum in one side and it gets applied to all three of these. There's another one that's three. And so through a series of connectors like that and vacuum lines, we can apply vacuum simultaneously to a whole bunch of units that operate the doors. And of course they operate also the trunk flap and the trunk lock and the flap for the gas tank. This is a brand new one that I have just as a spare. It's the gas tank flap, and you can see it works the same way. If I apply vacuum to one side, it will move it one way, and that pin just gets driven in a little hole through the gas flap. And of course, if I apply vacuum the other way, it moves it in the other direction. So again, as I turn the key, all of these are operated at once through a system of vacuum lines and T-connections and quad connections like that. So now let's go see how we would troubleshoot such a system and start under the hood. Now there are a couple of different models of vacuum pumps. That's the source of the vacuum. That's what creates the vacuum. On a diesel engine, we've got to have a pump. We don't have the Venturi effect that occurs in the intake manifold of a gasoline engine. We've got pressure in the intake manifold instead of a vacuum, so we need a pump. And on a late model 300D turbo, the vacuum pump is right underneath it, if you will, the power steering pump. So it's right here. On the early model 300Ds, I think it was 77 through 81, they had a different style vacuum pump, so you got to be careful if you ever need to rebuild that. There are two different kinds of pumps. The way to tell by looking is the late models have just one connection on the top, one line, one hose, if you will, coming out, and the early models had two. At any rate, this is the vacuum pump. This line then is a vacuum source, a source of vacuum, and if you follow it around, it goes to the brake booster mostly. That's where the big vacuum line goes to. But you can see there are two connections that are teed off of this main line that's to the brake booster. Gives you the power for the power brakes. And the first line that you encounter as you come from the pump splits off and goes to a whole series of connections down here. You can see there are several. And one of these in question is the one we're interested in. Later we'll come back and talk about this other vacuum line right here in another series, on these tapes. But for now, let's leave that alone and look at this line that comes off here and goes to several connections. In this particular diesel, and all of them, depending upon what they have in terms of luxuries, like a 300 SD might be a little different than a 300D, but all the door lock systems will have a check valve off of this T connection right here. That's the check valve. So you got vacuum that's moving this way. In other words, the air is moving this way toward the pump. So it's as if we're sucking on this line right here, right there. And then we have two lines coming off of this check valve. One of them is a yellow with a gray stripe. That's the one that goes back to the vacuum reservoir behind the seat. And the other one is a yellow line. That's the one that goes to the driver's door where the key lock is, where that T switch is, the T switch that's operated off the key. So this one goes to the T switch, to the center terminal or center post, if you will, on the T switch. That one goes to the reservoir. Now let's go just look at where that reservoir is, just so you know where it is, and then we'll come back to the driver's door and some of the other connections. If we look in the trunk, now I've got the light. In the trunk, if you look right up here behind the back seat, there's a reservoir, and coming into it is just one line, and it should be yellow-gray, and it is. So the yellow-gray line, let me find that gray stripe. Yes, yellow-gray line, and it's just one connection, and that holds that's the source of the vacuum. That's the tank. I've never seen one get a hole in it. So the only thing that I know could happen is you could lose the seal that's right there. There's a little rubber seal. And so that has to seal, obviously. That line just sticks through that hole. And you've got to get a good seal there so that you don't leak vacuum. And I guess that's about the only thing that could happen, but I've never seen a hole where in one of those tanks. Now, as you recall, there was a yellow line coming off that check valve, and it comes through the door right here. And it goes to, the yellow line goes to the center, and then the key moves the little element back and forth that switches the vacuum that exists here to either here or here, to either one of these lines. Now, there are two lines that come off of here that operate the system. One of them is yellow-green, one of them is yellow-red. The yellow-red happens to be what we call the locking line, or the interlocking line, as said in the book. The unlocking line is the yellow-green. So the yellow-green comes off of here, and the yellow-red comes off of here. Now, usually the first place I start, assuming that this is good, and this typically doesn't go bad that frequently. It does, and there's a way to check it, obviously. We always need that vacuum pump. But for a moment, let's assume that this is good. If we assume that this is good, then the very first connection that we can access these yellow, red, and yellow green lines is right here by the door, and we'll show you. It's right underneath the carpet arrangement. So if we pull the carpet out, first of all, I've got kind of a carpet cover. You can see how nasty they get. And then, if you look if you move the seat all the way back to this rearmost position, there are two snaps. One there, one there. And this piece of carpet comes right out. So that carpet comes out, and then there's a black plastic channel that will lift up pretty readily, actually. It's not difficult at all. And if we lift it up, we discover that here are the two lines coming from the door, a yellow-green and a yellow-red. The yellow-red is the locking line. The yellow-green is the unlocking. That's the first place I start. If I want to chase a vacuum leak, I'm going to disconnect that and connect my pump alternately to each of those two to find out whether the lock or the unlock seems to be the problem. So, is that better? Yeah. So, if I were to take my vacuum pump and connect it to this, what I should be able to do is operate the system. Now, if we look at the door locks, we can see them going down. This particular, you see I'm starting to pump a vacuum, and actually all of them should work. All of them should pump down. And so if we look at the door locks, if it's not leaking, we can see that all the locks went down. This is on the locking line, the red yellow. So each one of the locks depressed. Now, perhaps one of them wouldn't work, or perhaps we would start to lose vacuum. We would start to leak vacuum. We shouldn't see any visible change in that needle for several minutes as we look at it if we don't have a leak. So that red line doesn't have a leak. You can see that my vacuum gauge is showing that it's just sitting there.
Now,
Okay.
are there other things attached to that besides the doors, the three doors?
Yes, the flap on the trunk and the flap on the, the lock on the trunk and the flap on the gas tank are all connected. So really, connected to this one line, we've really got, let's see, 5 connections. 3 doors, the gas tank, and the trunk. So you got 5 vacuum elements, if you will, with those little rubber diaphragms connected to that one line. And so you see, I locked them all down and they're not leaking. So I don't have a leak on that side. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a leak on another side, or by pumping vacuum the other way, I might not see a leak. So, because it may not actually be a vacuum element, it could be one of these lines. As it comes through the door, they get a lot of wear and tear. They're hard plastic. And as the door is constantly opening and shutting, they develop a crack in them. So it might not be a vacuum element. And if it's not a vacuum element, then it probably will show up by having a good test on one side, lock or unlock, and a bad test on the other. If it's a vacuum line, if it's not a vacuum line, if it's a vacuum element, it'll probably show bad on both connections, just because if there's a hole in that diaphragm, that rubber diaphragm in the middle, no matter which way you apply vacuum, it still leaks, whether it's lock or unlock. So we didn't see a leak on that side. Let's connect that back, and let's look at the other side. Now, this is going to be the unlock side. So the green. Let's see if we can find a hole there. Now you see, well, no, it is holding vacuum. This car doesn't leak, or not that I know. It holds vacuum for a couple of days for sure when I go to the airport. So as far as I know, it doesn't have any leaks in it. I'm just doing it to illustrate how to troubleshoot it.
So if there was a leak, what's the next thing you would do?
Well, let's pretend that there was a leak. What's going to happen is that I'm going to see that leak down, perhaps at about that speed. I'm using the valve on the pump to simulate the problem. So if I saw the needle dropping like that, then I start to isolate the line. And the way to isolate it, let's assume that it was on this green line that I'm connected to right here. So right now, I'm connected here. Now you see it splits into two. The source, remember, came from the lock on the door, on the driver's door. So I'm applying vacuum there. One of these lines goes to the back door. The other line goes across the car to a similar set of connections exactly in this place, but on the passenger side. And from that point, it distributes to both the passenger's door, and then the back seat, and then the gas flap, and then the trunk. So the next connection that I would make from here is to test each of these separately. And if you pull this carpet back a little bit, you can see that this one is going that way, to that side of the car. This one is going straight backwards. So I know this one it ends right here at this door. Okay, so I would check that next, and then I would check this line, and I would isolate it to either here or here. Now, of course, if it was here, it's the simplest of all possible worlds, because if this one's leaking, I only have this to pull off. If this one, in fact, is leaking, the next place I'm going to go is on the other side in a similar way, lift this flap up on the other side, and then again I'm going to find out that one of them goes to the front door, one goes to the back door, and then they go to the gas flap and the trunk lock. Now, if it turns out that it's either the back door, the gas flap, or the trunk lock, the next thing I do before I start to pull the doors apart is to check the trunk lock and the gas flap next before I pull that last panel off, because I don't want to pull individually door panels off until I've isolated the problem. So now let's go and look at how to get to the gas flap and the trunk lock. The trunk lock is real simple. The gas flap takes a little more doing, but neither one of them are difficult. So let's pull this off and connect it back. Put this all back together. Okay, the trunk lock is very accessible. It's very simple. There's a little plastic door here that really just snaps into place. Just pull it off. And you see there are two screws, one here, and the actual vacuum element is right there, right inside there. It sits right there. Those are the two lines connecting to it. Again, you see red, yellow, which is the locking one, and the green, yellow, which is the unlocking one. So I would just pull those connections off separately and make sure that it'll hold a vacuum. In other words, if it leaks, that's the problem. So just to illustrate, if I pull that line off and connect my pump, what I should find is that it'll hold a vacuum, and it will. And if it were leaking, of course, the gauge would do that. It wouldn't hold a vacuum. Okay, so that holds the vacuum. So I can check that very easily without taking any door panels off. And then the gas tank flap.
So it didn't matter which one you tested.
No, it didn't.
If the unit leaked, either one of them would show.
Yes. Yes. Now, the gas tank flap, Gordon and I better change positions because it's underneath the panel here. And it's relatively easy to pull out of there. You see, this is just a panel, if you will, and it's just really set in place. You may have a couple of snaps on it. I've had this one out of there more than once. And if I am patient, it'll come out of there. So it comes out. And you can see that my two vacuum lines run along here. These are going to the vacuum element on the trunk. But way back tucked underneath here and this will be difficult to find with the camera, but there's a vacuum element right there. And actually, I've taken this one out. I didn't have one at the time, and I just plugged it off. You can see that. Now, I had plugged these off before because I had a leak and I didn't have it. Now I've ordered it and I've got it, and I'm going to put it back in there. But you know, this T was worn out. It had stretched over time, and the rubber gets kind of hard. And so what I do a lot of times when I need to repair these is I just use the pieces that are frequently used in drip irrigation systems. They have these little T's, and when I put a new piece of vacuum line on, a lot of times I splice into it with these splices that are used for that, you know, 1/4 inch hard plastic line that's used for irrigation. And by the same token, when I need to plug something off, a lot of times I use the plugs that come with those same things. And of course, if I need T's, they have T's also. So I use the drip irrigation stuff a lot of times. It works fine, and it's readily available. But anyway, these T's right here are kind of worn out. And so in order to get a good connection, what I'm going to do is just extend them with some new vacuum line so that I get a real solid connection on my new vacuum element. And this one is in kind of an awkward position. There. Now, as you recall, one of these is lock and one of them is unlock. And so I can look mechanically at this vacuum element and tell you that the locked position is going to be forward. And the only way that thing is going to pull forward is from this side. So that's got to be the lock side. That's got to be the unlock side. The red is the lock side. I'm going to connect the red one to there. And the green one is the unlock side. And connect it to there. Now it should have come through. Yes, and so it mechanically just goes through this little pin right here. And so now it's just a matter of putting the screws, connecting it. What I want to do is test it to make sure that it operates. Now I've had the system all down, so my tank has not been evacuated. So I'm going to have to start the car and evacuate the tank. So I'm going to go start the car and let it run for a few minutes to build up some vacuum. Shut the car off, and I'll show you that pin will move in and out as we operate the switch back and forth. So first of all, let's go get some vacuum built up by starting the car. So now I've got some vacuum built back up. So now if I turn this key, you can see that if I put it in the lock position, the door locks ought to go down, but that little trunk flap bar should be in a position where it would have locked that trunk flap, so it's toward the front of the car. Now if I unlock, hopefully that flap gordon will move back, or the little rod will move back, the little bar move back. So you can see it moves back and forth as I unlock and lock the car. And effectively that's what happens everywhere. The door locks, the trunk lock, everything just has a little mechanical bar that moves according to those vacuum diaphragms. Now the next thing we want to do is pull off a door panel and show how to change one of these vacuum elements. They're real simple, and there's one other common place for leaks, and that's actually in the hard plastic line that comes through the paneling in the car near the hinges of the doors, and it's constantly back and forth, and it breaks after a while, and that's where you can also have some vacuum leaks. So let's pull off a door panel. Okay, now if this vacuum element were bad, they're real easy to change. They're just 2 screws. This is a 5/16, which is equivalent to an 8mm. So just unscrew those 2 screws, and the vacuum element is right there. Now I happen to have one. And if you understand how it comes apart, it's much easier. There's a rod that runs the length of the door almost, comes down through there and is connected to that vacuum element. And that thing snaps in place. and let me snap it in place. So if it's locked, it's in that position. Now you can see there are little ribs in there that as this thing moves up and down, it grabs a hold of that rod. That rod has little grooves in it. And so what you need to do to unlock it is to get this back part of it and to unsnap it like that. So that's the snap affair that we need to remove when we change this vacuum element. And of course, we got to pull, the bottom line would be the locking line, the top line would be the unlocking line. So we've got to pull those two lines off as well as disconnect that. And so if we actually did that on this car, all we have to do is reach in there, feel that little snap, and snap it undone. And then the bar will come out. Sometimes after they've been in there for a while, they're a little stubborn, but they will come out of there. And then of course we could pull those two lines off. And that's it. Just pull the lines off and we could change that vacuum element, put a new vacuum element in there, do the reverse procedure.